The Colorado River is in a crisis. Can it be healed? Are we failing us by not affecting a healing? The health of the river is a reflection of the health of modern society. And the best place to measure the health of the river is right here at the Hoover Dam. The Hoover Dam forms a gigantic water storage reservoir behind it, named Lake Mead, that serves to smoothen out flow fluctuations and to raise the surface of the river close to 700 feet to enable hydroelectric power generation. Up to 90% of the water of the Colorado River in the USA alone is devoted to irrigation and the municipal water supply. More than 12 million people live directly in the river basin. Nearly 40 million people, both inside and outside the watershed, are dependent on the river. Increased water consumption has diminished the flow in the lower 100 miles so extensively that the river has not consistently reached the ocean since the 1960s. Then the drought began. Lake Mead is one of the two major reservoirs on the river. It was formed by the Hoover Dam. The lake has a surface area of 640 square kilometers with a maximum storage capacity for 35 billion cubic meters of water. It presently holds less than 12 billion cubic meters, roughly 1/3 of its capacity. The drawdown of the lake resulted primarily from the contracted applications for water being released at the Hoover Dam. The release exceeds the river's diminishing flow volume because of the drought. Lake Paul is the second largest reservoir on the river. It is formed by the Glen Canyon Dam upstream. The lake holds 30 billion cubic meters of water and is presently drawn down to roughly half its volume. The Glen Canyon Dam regulates the upstream collection that makes up 90% of the flow volume of the Colorado River. In between the two great reservoirs, the Colorado River flows through the Grand Canyon. After flowing through this deeply carved, arid landscape for over 400 kilometers, the Colorado River flows into Lake Mead. Most of the water that flows through Lake Mead originates far upstream of the Grand Canyon. Its volume of water that flows through the lake each year is enormous. It amounts to roughly 1/3 of the total volume of the lake. The Hoover Dam is required to release 11 billion cubic meters of water from Lake Mead each year. 90% of that comes from Lake Paul. The inflow of 10 billion cubic meters per year into Lake Mead is contracted to be released from the upstream Glen Canyon Dam and its reservoir, Lake Paul, if the water is available. The remaining less than 1 billion cubic meters is typically derived from tributaries below Lake Paul. This is how the system operated before the drought. The dramatic drawdown of the lake towards its systemic collapse should have never occurred. It occurred mostly because of the drought upstream of the Glen Canyon Dam. Since Lake Mead gets 90% of its water from upstream of the Grand Canyon, the volume of the river at the Hoover Dam is determined by the impact of the drought upstream. Corrective actions need to happen there. Normally, the major portion of the flow of the Columbia River originates in the mountains of Colorado, Wyoming, and Utah. This narrows the field even more. The remaining upper region of the catchment spaces for Lake Powell is a vast, empty and arid landscape. In other words, the Columbia River is essentially a river of the desert, flowing through a desert. The river that you see here cutting deep into the mountains receives little water from the surrounding landscape as it flows through the Grand Canyon. Lake Powell itself, that the Columbia River flows out of, has half the surface area of Lake Mead, but holds nearly as much water. It took 11 years for the lake to fill. This occurred in June 1980, long before the drought. Half of the lake's stored water has been drawn down again in response to the drought. Where can we get the needed water from in this arid landscape to heal the river from the effects of the drought? Hope for recovery seems almost non-existing, considering the arid landscape all around. The catchment basin for Lake Powell covers 280,000 square kilometers, but most of it is high-elevation arid landscape that offers little in runoff for the high-elevation lake that you see here at 3,700 feet above sea level. So where do we draw the water from to turn a high-elevation desert into a productive, lush, water-rich resource for human living that we can depend on under a wide range of climate conditions? Our healing of the river depends on this answer. But how to do it? Indeed, can we do it at all with an extreme drought over the landscape that is getting ever more severe? On the other hand, we don't have the option not to succeed. As I said, 40 million people, if not more, depend on the water that flows out of Lake Powell. Does the potential physically exist as a technological option to heal the river before its diminishment ends in a catastrophe? Obviously, the answer is that effective technological options exist for the rescue to be done. After all, this is what this video is all about. It is about physically healing the river. Of course, getting there involves several levels of revolutions. Are you ready for revolutions? The answer to where we can get the water from to heal the river is determined by the direction of the flow of the atmosphere that carries the water vapor that could save the river. Because of the rotation of the Earth and the latency of the atmosphere above it, the atmosphere near the surface flows almost constantly from east to west. The flow pattern is evident in this composite image derived from satellite measurements. We see low rates of precipitation extending far out into the Pacific in the shadow of the American West Coast mountains. The same flow also happens over land. As the satellite image shows, much of the water vapor from the Atlantic gets trapped and rains out into low areas over the Mississippi and the Missouri Basin, in front of the high Central Plains. By the time the atmosphere reaches the Colorado River, The water vapor density in the air has diminished to the point that cloud condensation no longer happens sufficiently for clouds to form and for clouds that exist to rain out efficiently. But this does not mean that there is no more moisture in the air. It only means that the water vapor density is slightly below the dew point requirements. What we call drought conditions are in reality only marginal changes in the water cycle dynamics. With the appropriate technological intervention, the margin can be shifted into our favor and the rains be restarted. This wouldn't be a violation of the natural processes, as we are told it is. It would instead be an extended application of the principles of the natural processes. It wouldn't be a case of magically creating rain. It would merely be the case of adjusting the boundary of the natural processes. Let me illustrate the natural conditions. The clouds in this photo, to judge by the height of the mountains in the background, typically form at an altitude of 4,000 feet. However, the presence of clouds at this altitude does not imply that water vapor is not present anywhere else in the atmosphere, above or below. Water vapor extends far above the clouds and all the way down to the ground below them. Let's assume, theoretically, that these clouds 4,000 feet above the sea mark the upper edge of the high-density regions of the water vapor in the atmosphere that is typically in the range of 4%. What does it mean? It means that if all the water in the atmosphere up to the height of the clouds would be converted to rain, it would create a rain puddle across the world 160 feet deep. The flood would drown everybody. This gigantic flood would nevertheless represent only a portion of the water contained in the atmosphere. Let's apply this comparison to the Colorado River system. As I said before, the Colorado River is made up of the sum total of all the rain falling over a catchment basin 280,000 square kilometers in size. We wouldn't need more than a trifle of the 160 feet deep pool of water in the atmosphere to restore the Colorado River. A few inches of extra rain drawn from the atmosphere, spaced out over a year, would restore the health of the river, with amply left over for increased agricultural development in spite of the drought. Let's look at the numbers. Lake Paul's catchment basin covers an area of 280,000 square kilometers in size, or 280,000 million square meters. 10 centimeters of rainfall on this area would add up to 28,000 million cubic meters of water. This volume would be nearly equal to the entire volume of Lake Paul. Half of that, 5 centimeters only, or roughly 2 inches of extra rain per year, would restore Lake Paul to its full state, not considering evaporation. With an equivalent of 160 feet of water being located as vapor in the atmosphere, it shouldn't be hard to squeeze a few inches out of the huge volume of water that exists in the atmosphere by technological means. The technology is simple. An electric corona wire is charged up with high voltage potential. Atmospheric particles become ionized thereby. The ionized particles become lofted up into the regions of the atmosphere where cloud nucleation can occur and increase the aerosol nucleation process. Ionized particles are 100 times more electrically attractive to water vapor than non-ionized particles. They enhance the process that forms nucleonic clusters, which will eventually grow in a chain reaction and condensation process, wherever larger clusters are formed that eventually become raindrops. The introduction of ionized particles helps the entire process along and makes it more powerful. In practical applications, different variations of the cloud ionization technology have been applied, often with astonishing success. In experimental applications, ionization technology has filled many a drying up reservoir to the full and has even been applied to fighting forest fires. However, no large-scale application has yet been attempted. Too much science mysticism, skepticism, and political opposition stands in the way of the practical development of this efficient component of the climate cycle. The only large-scale applications that are routinely staged are staged by the natural system itself and by the sun, as I will present later. Electric ionization is evidently a natural component in the cloud dynamics that are the critical elements for the entire freshwater cycle on Earth. Every single drop of fresh water on Earth, with just a few minute exceptions, result from cloud dynamics. And these dynamics are primarily electric in nature. Evaporation and condensation are essentially electric phenomena. It would be surprising if ionization wouldn't play a major role in producing the rain that waters the earth, because the state of water itself is controlled to a large degree by the expression of electric principles. We wouldn't need to change the natural principles to produce more rain where needed, even if we had the power to do so. The world's water system is perfectly designed, beginning at the atomic level, so that we only need to shift the boundary conditions to the natural utilization of the electric principles that are fundamental to rain. A water molecule is a combination of an oxygen atom with two hydrogen atoms attached. The electron sharing between the three atoms creates an asymmetry in their attachment to each other. As a result of the asymmetry, the oxygen atom receives a slight negative electric appearance, and the hydrogen atoms a positive appearance. By the resulting electric bipolarity, all water molecules become electrically attached to one another at close proximity. They remain isolated only as water vapor, and only when the water vapor density in the atmosphere is low. At this stage, water in the atmosphere is invisible. It is so because when the water vapor density is low in the atmosphere, the electric attraction between the molecules is too weak to have an effect to bring them together. Consequently, the molecules became isolated, small and invisible. A wide range of factors affect the attachment of the water molecules to one another. The air temperature is one of these factors. When the temperature is low, the water molecules are more at rest and thereby more able to attract one another. Catalysts also play a major role. Minute smooth surfaces tend to align the molecules laterally, whereby their ionic properties become more efficiently expressed, as in the case of the spiderweb shown here. This principle is utilized in the highly controversial and messy cloud seeding operations for commercial rainmaking. Of course, the water vapor density in the air also plays a major role. For each specific temperature, a minimal water vapor density is required for the natural dew process to happen without the influence of external enhancement. Strong induced ionization can also affect the process. Ionization by cosmic ray interaction can induce the dew nucleation at levels of water vapor density that normally would not cause any rain. The intensity of cosmic ray ionization, which produces the most powerful ionization in the atmosphere, can have amazing effects on cloud condensation and subsequent rainfall. A recent example of cosmic cloud ionization was experienced in Texas, where a flash flood occurred after years of drought. In some cases, the sudden rainfall produced a whopping 6 inches of water in a single day in areas where not a drop of rain was seen in years. The phenomenon occurred over a wide area. It is interesting to note that during the time of this happening, large rifts, also called coronal holes, had opened up in the corona around the Sun. It is not widely known that the Sun is the largest source for cosmic rays in the solar system. Solar cosmic rays are typically 1,000 times more numerous than galactic cosmic rays that originate outside the solar system. Cosmic rays are not streams of energy like rays of light, but are fast-moving single protons and electrons of various energies. Since, unlike light rays, protons and electrons carry an electric charge. Consequently, their moving through the atmosphere has a strongly ionizing effect. It induces an electric charge in the air. As I said, most of the cosmic rays in the solar system come from the Sun. They outnumber the extrasolar or galactic cosmic rays, typically 1,000 to 1. This ratio is to be expected. With the Sun producing high-energy plasma fusion reactions at its surface that synthesize atomic elements in vast quantities and radiate light and heat in the process, it stands to reason that occasionally highly energized plasma particles, termed protons and electrons, escape from the fusion reactions. The escaping electrons and protons become the solar cosmic rays. The majority of the solar cosmic rays are trapped within the corona that surrounds the Sun, like a dense, invisible blanket of plasma. Only a tiny portion of the Sun's corona is ever seen in visible light, which in this case becomes visible during the total eclipse of the Sun by the Moon standing in front of it. That the vastly larger solar corona is highly efficient in trapping the solar cosmic rays becomes evident when holes form in the corona. We call the cracks in the plasma mantle around the Sun coronal holes. The existence of these cracks is slightly visible in the high UV spectrum. The coronal holes shown here, which show up as major cracks right across the face of the Sun, have occurred at the same time as the great flooding in Texas has occurred. As I said, under normal conditions, the solar cosmic rays outnumber the galactic cosmic rays, typically 1,000-fold. But when the coronal holes open up, the ratio becomes vastly larger. And so are the ionizing effects of the resulting cosmic ray showers in the atmosphere on the Earth as a consequence. That's when some of the gigantic flash floods occur. It has been long suspected that cosmic rays affect the cloud nucleation. An experiment was constructed at the CERN laboratory in Europe to test the theory by injecting artificial cosmic rays into a test chamber where the results can be measured. The measured results shot straight up and off the chart when the cosmic ray injection was turned on. The experienced result in Texas may have been of a similar nature. The great biblical flood that the Noah legend was spun around may have been caused by a similar type of solar event that created a large coronal hole for an extended period. If so, it may have occurred early in the interglacial time when the Sun was hotter and its fusion process more intense. An asteroid exploding in the corona may have ripped open a large hole that consequently opened a path for large floods of solar cosmic rays to shower the Earth. The resulting giant flash flood might have been extended for days and weeks. It would likely have flooded all of Mesopotamia for weeks, if not months. Mesopotamia is a perfect shallow flood bowl with a tiny outlet to the Persian Gulf that all its rivers converge at. The point is that solar cosmic ray ionization may be one of the most powerful factors for cloud nucleation that exists naturally, if not the most powerful factor of them all. And this is evidently so not only for cataclysmic events. All this means that we need to look to the Sun and its corona as a significant ionizing driver for the big changes in global climate dynamics that occur and have occurred, which are erroneously attributed to man-made CO2 emissions. The solar cosmic ray factor, by the sheer magnitude of it, is obviously also the real causative factor of the global spreading drought. The CO2 density in the atmosphere has no effect on the global climate. The total CO2 climate forcing adds up to 10 millionths of a percent. Up to 97% of the climate on Earth is forced by water vapor and cloudiness, which in turn is largely affected by the changing solar cosmic ray density. CO2 has no measurable effect on climate dynamics in this context. Man-made global warming is a political myth. That man-made global warming is a political plot hatched in the workshops of empire as an element of the ongoing war of the system of empire against humanity, is evident by the timing when it was first introduced, which occurred in parallel with two other major genocidal assaults on humanity. While every one of these three projects fell far short in destructive effects from what had been intended, the result nevertheless adds up to hundreds of millions of corpses laid on to the imperial altar of world depopulation. Since the global warming project proved to be the most destructive of the three, it is promoted furiously once again in the shadow of the collapsing imperial financial system, with Russia, China and India being targeted. CO2 is merely hyped up in this context as a whipping boy, a type of mythological villain, while the real target is the destruction of humanity and its power to live. The drought is now drawn into this deadly context for which the same whipping boy is deployed again. With all this considered, the CO2-based man-made global warming hoopla is purely a political dogma without the slightest truthful scientific foundation to stand on. It is deployed as a lie that is intentionally forged to create a problem in the mind for which no variable solution can exist under the parameters of the dogma. The paraded solution that the doctrine allows is for humanity to eliminate itself as a cancer on the earth. This insanity has become a widely accepted dogma, like the flat earth dogma once had been, even while the heart of the modern dogma, man-made global warming, is physically impossible. The process of imposing lies that society lacks the scientific resources to recognize as lies creates a mythological problem for which no solution is deemed possible in the mind, which is mentally destructive, because when the mind is forced to accept a problem for which no solution is deemed possible, the mind protects itself by reverting backwards to a more infantile state, where it accepts absurdities as real increasingly. Cynicism is often a symptom of the deprived freedom in society to think as human beings. On this train of mental destruction, the most horrendous sacrifices are demanded from society and are complied with as society destroys itself. The real factor for the changing climate is found in solar dynamics. There we see enormous changes happening on a scale that almost challenges the imagination. The challenges that we see happening there by the evidence they present are vastly larger than anything that humanity can affect. Nor are these changes natural in the context of historic experiences on Earth. The changes are exceptional in this context. They are natural only in the long-term context of the now unfolding electric ice age dynamics that occur in 120,000-year intervals. Consequently, we see changes unfolding in our world of a type that has never been encountered before in known experience, which we find ourselves challenged to understand and to live with. The challenges are both perplexing and hard to accept, because society allowed its science to become so deeply perverted that electric cosmic phenomena are not even deemed to exist, even in the face of monumental evidence for it. The Ulysses spacecraft presented some of the perplexing evidence. The Ulysses mission flew during the beginning phase of the grand electric weakening in the solar system that started the Ice Age transition that is now upon us. Ulysses measured a 30% reduction in solar wind pressure in the short space of 10 years. That's huge. This means that the electric powering of the sun, illustrated here in principle as a large example, is getting weaker with the weakening of the solar system at an enormously rapid rate, and with the consequence that the plasma corona surrounding the sun is getting weaker likewise. The climate changes that we now see, including the drought, are consequences of the changing electric solar dynamics. These effects are huge, because the sun is huge and is a rapidly changing factor. CO2, in comparison, doesn't even get onto the climate stage with measurable effects, not even with the minutest effects. CO2-caused climate change is simply physically impossible. As one would expect from this, Ulysses has measured a 20% increase in cosmic ray flux over the time frame of the measured electric weakening of the sun, which affects cloudiness and climate. No distinction was made at the time between solar cosmic ray flux and galactic cosmic ray flux. Whatever the case might have been, the increased cosmic ray flux, which obviously is continuing, would be reflected on Earth as increased cosmic ray-induced cloud ionization, with increased cloudiness resulting, and increased rain, mostly over the oceans, with the increased rain being drawn from water vapor in the atmosphere. We experience the results now as reduced overall water vapor density in the atmosphere, and with it the beginning of the drought. The result of this interlocked process has thereby set the stage for the beginning of increased drought conditions all over the world that affected California especially hard. Typically, with the truthful recognition in science banished, the cultivated trap of the global warming hoopla is being deployed ever more vigorously to blame the drought on the man-made global warming as a means to tighten the noose more powerfully on mankind in order to prevent a rational response in society to the drought. A major drought that causes famine is welcome in the halls of empire, where the mass depopulation of the earth is promoted ever more to protect the oligarchic system. Famine has been hailed as being more effective than war, because as the masters have pointed out, wars are disappointing for them as they don't kill enough people. That the drought is not man-made, but results from reduced water vapor density in the air that results from cosmic factors, is evident in the now increasing climate fluctuations that have resulted from the diminished greenhouse effect that is caused by lower water vapor density and not from increased CO2, which, if it had any effect at all, would have increased the moderating effect that the greenhouse has on climate, while all experience shows worldwide that the opposite is happening. Conservatively, 97% of the greenhouse effect of the atmosphere is caused by water vapor. The greenhouse effect moderates the climate fluctuations. The worldwide experience is that the fluctuations are getting larger and harsher. The greenhouse is diminishing instead of becoming stronger. With the greenhouse effect being largely affected by cosmic ionization in the atmosphere, for increased cloudiness over the oceans that reduces the global water vapor density, we experience the expected reduced climate moderation rather strongly in the form of ever more intense climate fluctuations. We experience hotter summers and colder winters. The hotter summers have a dramatic effect on the polar regions that receive up to 24 hours of sunshine in the summer. If CO2 was the greenhouse gas villain it is made out to be, we should be experiencing gentler climate fluctuations. Instead, we experience the opposite. With 97% of the greenhouse effect being caused by water vapor in the atmosphere, the diminished water vapor sets the stage for ever harsher climate fluctuations. This is what we experience in parallel with the drought. CO2 has nothing to do with either. Also, instead of global warming, the Earth is actually experiencing global cooling alongside the drought. The increased cloudiness that results from increased solar cosmic ray flux reflects increased amounts of the sun's radiated energy back into space. This reflected energy is thereby lost to the Earth's global heat budget, resulting in global cooling. The cooling won't cause an ice age. It is too minuscule for that. Nevertheless, the cooling is experienced in many ways in the winters, and increasingly so. In the larger context, the creeping drought caused by diminished water vapor is merely a fringe effect of the ongoing electric ice age dynamics that we see unfolding in many ways, but cannot hold back. We are like observing spectators of it. The Ice Age transition that is presently in progress is a vast show of gigantic interstellar and galactic forces at play that we cannot affect in any way. But we can understand the effects and eliminate the impact of the effects on human living with technological means. We as human beings are not impotent when it comes to uplifting our world. With our scientific understanding of the operating principles of the cloud dynamics, we can introduce slight changes in the dynamics of the system and shift the boundary conditions. We can do this in a manner that increases the operating power of the natural system. On this platform, technology gives us the means to manage the forming of raindrops according to our need, independent of the dynamics of the natural system. Practical experiments have shown that we do have this capability, though we have barely begun to develop this open door further. The experimental commercial systems have simply ionized the air. Obviously, we can go much further on this front. A potential electric charge carrier that comes to mind is carbon dioxide, called CO2. It is a molecule made up of two oxygen atoms attached to a carbon atom. Both atoms have a large number of electrons in the outer electron shells, for a total of 16, or twice that for a water molecule. The attachment of the atoms is perfectly centrosymmetric, so that the molecule has no dipole effect. It is unknown to what degree CO2 can be electrically ionized by stripping one of its electrons that would result in bipolarity. To my knowledge, no work has been done in this area, which theoretically has promising potential. CO2 is used in a wide range of industrial applications, such as an inert gas in welding and fire extinguishers, as a pressurizing gas in oil recovery, as a chemical feedstock, even as a refrigerant, and in liquid form as a solvent in the decaffeination of coffee, as it enables supercritical drying. It is even added to drinking water and carbonated beverages, including beer and champagne, to give them a sparkle. The frozen solid form of CO2, known as dry ice, is used as low-temperature refrigerants and as an abrasive in dry ice blasting. I'm bringing the case of CO2 up to highlight the lack of technological development for the specific purpose of atmospheric aerosol ionizing. The cloud experiment at the gigantic CERN lab in Europe was specifically focused on cosmic ray ionizing instead of technological ionizing. All this means that we have a wide open potential in this area, which, until the drought began, we had extremely little incentive to explore, and lacked the incentive for commercial systems to succeed for the lack of large monetizable profits. Sure, we have also other means to deal with the effects of the drought, such as with large-scale water diversions, such as the redirecting of the outflow of the Columbia River, for example, to the coast of California. This option exists. We also have the option to construct large-scale deep ocean reverse osmosis desalination facilities to produce our own fresh water, which we will likely need to do when the sun goes inactive in the 2050s and the Ice Age begins. This doesn't mean that we don't also have the option, as human beings, to shift the rain-producing boundary conditions in the natural rain-making process to restore rainfall to conditions that have become the normal state during the interglacial period of the last 12,000 years, which is fast ending. The rain-making technology that we develop today, which has already been demonstrated in principle, will serve us well in later years when the sun goes inactive and loses 70% of its radiated power and the earth loses 80% of its precipitation. In this context, the power of science and technology gives us the great freedom that is inherent in our humanity to live richly under the worst conditions, even under Ice Age conditions, that would be unsurvivable without this freedom. While the coming Ice Age conditions will force much of humanity to relocate itself into the tropics before the northern regions become uninhabitable, we find that the tropics, especially the regions near the equator, do presently have the highest precipitation in the world, which will likely be the case also during Ice Age conditions. The tropical air currents that sweep towards the equator, typically called the trade winds, deposit large volumes of fresh water into the ocean as the air is driven upwards by the worldwide circulation patterns. While the water vapor density in the atmosphere will likely diminish by 80% when the Ice Age begins, the use of ionization technology might give us enough rain in the diminished environment to meet all of our needs, including the agricultural needs for irrigating our floating agriculture across the equatorial seas. Thus, with the unceasing focus on science and technology, humanity gains itself the freedom to live unrestrained, to gain its independence from the chokeholds where doom would otherwise await it. Achieving independence from doctrinal limitations, submissions, and fears is one of the highest levels expression of human freedom in this world. For the needed breakout to the freedom to be able to live independent of the worst so-called natural conditions, America is probably the culturally most ideally self-conditioned nation on the earth. The quest for freedom and independence as a concept is rooted in the very heart of American history. The quest for freedom by claiming independence may not yet been fully forgotten in America. The great American history of freedom and independence that included both heroics and large sacrifices in the course of securing them is celebrated each year on the 4th of July, commemorating the Day of Independence. Independence Day is the day when America formally claimed its freedom from the world imperial colonial system, the day on which its formal Declaration of Independence was boldly ratified in Congress, and this perhaps also with the recognition that the self-acknowledged freedom would need to be defended. The real Declaration of Independence had been demonstrated to the British Empire already 3 years earlier, on December 16, 1773, before it was formalized. This declaration was not well received by the king. The Declaration of Independence, written in the heart, was delivered to the king with an act of defiance that became known as the Boston Tea Party. The Boston Tea Party culminated from years of protests over British taxes, British governments, and the arrogance of the empire to tax a people without representation. During a town meeting of several thousand people in protest of the consignment of tea for which tax was due on arrival, everything that was foul in the treatment of the American colonists under the despotism of empire was stretched up and remembered. Demands were made that the consignees of the tea resign and that the tea of empire be sent back. The consignees were called traitors to their country, butchers who have done and are doing everything to murder and destroy all that shall stand in the way of their private interest. When the governor held his ground against the popular demand, possibly because two of his sons were named consignees, the people decided to latch on to their freedom as human beings and act in defense of a people's right. In disguise as Native Americans, the political activists boarded the remaining tea ships and dumped the disputed tea into the brink, all 342 chests of it. The world was changed by this event. The nation became free in heart and soul. The empire responded with intolerable legal and economic reprisals, with a vengeance designed to roll back this history, which by then was no longer possible. The Tea Party is significant in that it marked the historic beginning of the end of empire. In defiance of empire, the colonists banded together and formed their own government, including a continental congress by which the American people became in fact a free and sovereign independent nation. The thereby established concept of independence was formally voted up years later as a resolution in the Continental Congress. The National Independence Resolution was voted up 2.5 years after the Tea Party on July 2nd, 1776. It confirmed what had been established firmly in the heart. With the Independence Resolution voted up in the Congress on the 2nd of July in 1776, it was understood that a document needed to be scripted that formally declared what had been determined with the resolution. The famous Declaration of Independence became the result of that. Thomas Jefferson had been previously given the task to organize the preparation of a draft for such a document. The draft was subsequently debated in Congress for 2 days and was refined item by item into a final formal statement to the people and to the masters of empire, indicating that the world has changed. As it was, the finished document of the American Declaration of Independence was voted up on the 4th of July, 1776. The vote declared the intention of the nation to be free. It did not mark the end of the rule of empire in America, far from it, but the intention did mark the end of the beginning. If Shakespeare, the great dramatist of the nature of the empire, had lived at the time of the historic American Declaration, he would likely have agreed that the achievement marked merely a beginning. He may have success that the people themselves didn't fully comprehend what the concept of independence means. Did it mean merely the dissolution of formal ties between the colonies and the empire, by which the colonies would be free of the direct control of the masters of empire, in this case, the British Empire? The colonial congress was formed in 1774 for a much smaller objective than independence. The Congress was convened to petition the British king to back off from the empire's reaction to the Tea Party, which had been too punishing and too despotic. As it was, the king refused to relent. Instead of relenting, he declared the petition a rebellion. The brutal kingly response to the Tea Party roused the otherwise docile public into a debate that 2 years later had raised the platform in public awareness to enable the full independence resolution in Congress. Shakespeare might have seen the result as a compromise. He might have seen the Jefferson Declaration modified and voted up in Congress as an apology to the king, saying in essence to the king that the American people who had escaped the prison of empire in Europe in 1621 with the Mayflower had over the ensuing century learned to recognize that a human being has certain fundamental legal rights, such as being free from despotism, and that these rights must be respected. Shakespeare might have pointed out that the Jefferson Declaration didn't really ask for much more than that, even after Congress had worked on it for 2 days, saying, "The founding father had indeed asked for nothing more than the most minimal that a human being is due, the freedom to pursue life, liberty, and happiness, and the right to establish the requisite form of government that are best able to assure those basic freedoms." While the outcome was a heroic stand to take for the American Congress, it was still far too small in demand, as if Jefferson had said to the king, "Look, the world has changed. Society has grown up. We don't ask for much, but we do ask for these basic little things. These can no longer be avoided, so let us have these freedoms." Of course, as one would expect, the king, being a pathetic little man, as he was, answered with war. Shakespeare might have pointed out that the Jefferson Declaration of Independence, as a compromise, might have been intended to avoid war. Shakespeare might have added that one cannot do this. One cannot avoid war with a compromise in principle. Shakespeare might have said bluntly that the American Declaration of Independence should have begun squarely and openly with the demand that Great Britain abolish within its realm the system of empire that has ruled the American nation and the British nation too, and has enslaved both for far too long. Thus, under natural law and principle, the system of empire has no right or basis to exist and should be let go for reasons of its universal inhumanity, and of course also for the freedom of Great Britain. Shakespeare might have said that such a declaration as he suggested, based on his knowledge of history, would have reflected the sentiments of the Boston Tea Party more fully and more correctly than the official document did. He would point out that the official declaration stands as an apology for the system of empire and its claimed right of kings to exploit those of humanity whom it could grasp. With such a compromising apology, as it were, America has surrendered the very freedom in principle that it had been aiming for, which is so often the case in history. The German poet Friedrich Schiller had lamented years later, in his time, about the lack of vision in society to claim the fullness of its potential for its freedom as human beings, and its pathetic tendency to bow to what is choking humanity. Schiller said in essence that far too often the great opportunities in history that invite decisive footsteps to be taken find society a pathetically little people, so that the opportunities to uplift the world fall onto the ground unrealized. America may have been the first great exception on the train of submission to the smallness in thinking. It stood up boldly to claim what no nation has claimed before, claiming the independence of the human being from the train to hell, from the smallness in thinking, even while it fell short of achieving the ultimate. The great American achievement of winning independence from the lure of smallness have in many ways inspired and uplifted the world. These achievements remain to stand as an inspiration, though the ultimate has not yet been achieved, but may yet be achieved. Shakespeare might have written up the American Declaration of Independence somewhat differently, more boldly perhaps in his own unique style, in a more correct manner as he may have seen it, reaching back to the sentiments in Boston Harbor on the famous day in 1773 when it all began. He would have started by boldly declaring in his opening statement what the nature of the system of empire is and has been throughout history, going far back in time to where the system of empire became recognized as the whore of Babylon that should have been abolished even then, but was allowed to fester and to destroy civilization till it collapsed into its own inner emptiness. The whore is not a person, nor a nation, he would point out emphatically. The whore is the devil within that destroys civilization, that inspires a society to murder its children, demolish its economy with greed, and then inspires war for looting and slavery to feed its lust until nothing remains. Shakespeare might have pointed out that the Babylonian had an inkling of the challenge they faced with the devil within. They saw it as a conflict, symbolically, between the chaos monster and the sun god. Two types of mentalities, with the sun god determined to subdue the monster. The metaphor describes well the nature of the conflict between empire, the chaos monster, and humanity, the sun god. The chaos monster may be termed the system of empire in modern language. Empire had become a monster that society had seduced itself to love, perhaps only reluctantly, while it was destroying itself with its devotion to the monster, to the whore of Babylon, the very fabric of civilization that human existence depends on. The great lawmaker in civilization, Hammurabi, may have endeavored to minimize the damage that was being done on the platform of the whore, that is, empire, without being able to eradicate this platform that supported his own power, by which Babylon itself was doomed. The failures of Hammurabi were that he couldn't gear down the whole, that is empire, and that he couldn't gear up his own universal humanity, from which independence is achieved. He bowed to the whore instead of to his freedom, perhaps because the very notion of independence from the system of empire was unthinkable at this time, even as an ideal concept. The biblical term, the whore of Babylon, symbolizes the seductive nature of the system of empire as a disease in civilization that promises the sky while it cannot hide its lack of substance in the nakedness of its emptiness. The whore of Babylon is scripted in biblical texts as riding a seven-headed beast that all the kings of the earth bow to. Thus, she, the whore, as a concept, she, the system of empire, represents a compound disease of mental failures that no one in the ancient world had even dreamed to gain its freedom from, or even its independence from, while only a very few people in modern time have reached that high. The world still lives largely under the spell of the whore and destroys itself accordingly. The declaration of freedom from the whore in the world would declare in its preamble the emptiness of the system of empire as its real nature. It would be said of her, the whore that is empire, that by her own deeds she lays bare before the world, and always has, her absolute lack of a human soul. She is a disease, not a person or a nation. She is a disease that has to some degree infected all nations, and as a disease she has no place in human society. It thus becomes the duty of society to raise up its humanity as a shield, and with it to shield itself day and night against the poison of her issuance, until the whore has been dethroned, and all nations are become free. Here begins independence, Shakespeare might say. Nobody can be ground into the dirt so deeply that the crimes of empire, the devil within, past, present, and future, will remain unseen forever and remain unchallenged till the end of time. This isn't possible. The whore that is empire lays bare before the world its inhumanism, its dance of hell on earth. The noise of her dance begins her epitaph, her self-proclaimed timely statement of inner emptiness, the emptiness that is in humanity, whereby her own doom ultimately becomes unavoidable, not the doom of mankind, nor the doom of the congregation of the nations. Shakespeare would speak in metaphor as he always did, and rightfully so, because neither he, nor anyone in his time, nor anyone in 1776, when America reached for independence, could have imagined the scope of the monumental crisis that society would allow to come upon it by its failing to flush the system of empire, the whore of Babylon, from the landscape of its thinking, its economy, its science, its culture, and its civilization. For more than 50 years, humanity faced the whore's death threat of nuclear war that promises the extinction of the human species. For 50 years, the doomsday clock of nuclear war stood near the midnight hour, ticking and getting us closer and closer by keeping the whore in power even at this critical stage, with nothing being done to end the crisis. Shakespeare couldn't have imagined this. For even longer than this, from the 1970s onward, the modern whore of Babylon has been crying for world depopulation genocide, with the updated goal to eliminate 6 billion people from the face of the earth under the depopulation policy. Instead of eradicating the source of this absolute madness and assault against it, society takes an active part in the mass murder of up to 100 million people a year with the biofuels hoax under the carbon reduction doctrine that is a hoax itself, as I said earlier. Likewise, society stands coerced by the whore to close its eyes to the near Ice Age challenge in 30 years, that almost no one of humanity will be able to survive without giant infrastructures being built in preparation for it, which are not being built or even considered. The movement on this front for humanity to have a future is presently zero. The worldwide drought that is a fringe effect of the unfolding Ice Age dynamics similarly gets a zero response. This is the reflection of the whore being still alive in society. Shakespeare might comment, bewildered. He might say about it, "A terrible vengeance is now way overdue to descend on her, the whore of Babylon, the devil within, in modern time, while time remains, and on her children, by the force of her own undoing of all that is human and good. By her own foul nature, she, the enemy of the people of the world, the last and only enemy of mankind, stands bloated before the world by her dearest treasures, the power of her money, the tyranny of her sword, and her pervasion of all science. She, whore of Babylon, has by her very existence, ripped away from her face in those very storms that destroy the inflation of the arrogance of insanity and inhumanity, the cover-up that now no longer hides the mask of empire, which even the masters of ancient Babylon ultimately could not contain. It is she, the empire, she, the devil within, the modern Babylon redressed as the new world order. She herself, who, together with her minions, has inflated the fires of her own destruction, and of her lackeys with her, who have swelled into a rather large congregation of thieves and swindlers. She is Babylon reborn, with all the filth attached by which Babylon has died, and with not a single trace of the light of humanity within her that could have saved her. She is the whore of the ages, who devours the world's precious, and issues forth famine and death. She is our enemy, who would destroy us all. She is the enemy of all people. But it is now she who is already seeing her power destroyed by her own cruel hand. Ill-fated beast that she is, and always was, she brings about her own doom by the very hand with which she strikes against mankind, her intended prey. In her beginning doom unfolds the still uncertain chance for civilization to survive. But Shakespeare would say, don't compromise with the devil in the house. As you watch her dance with vigor in whatever hell she has chosen to bring the end upon herself and her lackeys, don't ever compromise yourself to being mesmerized by the whore. Tell her that the world she claims to destroy is our world, not hers. We, not she and her lackeys, are the people of the real world. The real world is our world, which she and her kind have soiled for far too long. Begone then, witch, begone Babylon, begone empire, begone whore, begone together with your zoo of thieves, swindlers, and money changers of the foulest sort, whom you protect, who, with your blessing, have claimed the right to devour society's living and to murder at their pleasure. Begone with them all. You whore are on the line for this. You are doomed by this time, by the ugly slime of your inhumanity, your fascism, your bloodlust, your lies, by which you stand convicted by humanity. The heavens above have condemned you, and the earth below has caught you in your own trap, which between them say unto you, Go, witch, begone, begone empire, and take your stinking lackeys with you as you go. Let them feast in hell on your delicacies, on your stolen loot that has no value, and on your dreams of power and glory and war and murdering that have no legitimacy and never had in the world of man. Shakespeare might encourage us to keep his rather blunt declaration of the natural human independence, which is the healing of humanity of its disease, in mind whenever we read the Jefferson version that was evidently not written for the end of empire, but might have been seen with a profound sense of the beginning for the end, which as such has enduring obligations attached to it for all mankind and by mankind. Shakespeare might add, paste the Jefferson Declaration of Independence on the wall in your bathroom and read it every day and ponder its shortcomings. And when your thinking encounters the Babylonian part in your mind, the part about the whore of Babylon that still rules you and rules your thinking and your world, then reach for the lever and flush, and raise yourself up to claim your independence. Flush the crap of empire away. Flush it from the landscape of civilization. Make the flushing count. Flush and flush again. The flushing sound is the correct music for the epithet of the whore. America has written the words that go with the music. In the flow of the profound loving that evidently inspired the words of the American Declaration of Independence, that was created as a declaration of a society primarily to itself, the American nation began to experience the call of freedom. And science will soon become free likewise, on discourse held steady, becoming free to serve mankind, and mankind becoming free with it, free to meet its needs, free to unleash its potential, free to create a renaissance to face the next ice age with, and being proudly free to have a future in its grasp at last. In this long ensuing war of empire against humanity, which is still ongoing, the future needs to be claimed actively. On the passive side, hundreds of millions have already perished, and humanity itself now stands at the brink of extinction with nuclear war. All of this means that our very existence and our chance to have a future depends on winning this final battle of the endless seeming war that has infected too many nations. The challenge of the California drought and the Ice Age challenge that the drought is a part of are not parts of the war against mankind. However, our response to the climate change depends absolutely on us winning the long-delayed fundamental victory of independence from the war that opens the door to universal freedom. It appears that the founding fathers of the USA, as they composed the Declaration of Independence, had perhaps a faint sense of the greater challenge before all of humanity, where no one is free on earth until all are free. For this reason, the science video presented here is dedicated in honor of America's celebration of its hopeful Independence Day. Of its hope-filled Independence Day on July 4th, 1776. The world has a great need today to claim its freedom in science as a step to reach for the future and to advance the scope of its science to protect human existence and to expand it with a great renaissance. The age of slavery, poverty, and universal impotence should have ended eons ago. It should have ended in Babylon, the horrors imposed by the failure to end the war, and those horrors that are still prepared to happen might yet force mankind into oblivion. Even today. The stage for this doom remains established. Nuclear war is a game that is played in minutes. The players are on the field. It takes something more solid than hope to call the game off. The face of man is rich We do have the power to change our world and to change the course of the world with our dawning light of profound divine expression that we see in the compound face of man as the gem of the universe. Look at mind. Our window to the future is our freedom to pursue the leading of infinite mind. Humanity stands tall as the greatest expression of infinite mind that is experienced on earth. The power of the quality of mind is expressed by humanity in the form of pioneering discoveries, like children pursue in exploring their newly discovered worlds with enthusiasm and joy. On any lesser platform, the very concept of a future fades out of sight, as it so often has in the past. The quality of mind defines an active aspect of our spiritual humanity, high above mysticism and inaction. Look at principle. Humanity is also a champion of principle as an active force in civilization. Civilization is not arbitrary. It is the result of creative principle expressed. Humanity no longer lives by the primitive resources of the earth, but lives by created resources derived from applied, discovered universal principles, such as the principle of agriculture and the principle of nuclear power. Look at spirit. Above mind and principle stands the light of civilization that is our amazing human spirit that poets have called divine, which it really is, according to evidence. No other species on earth has ever seen the future, much less explored it, and owned the technologies with which to bring itself into the future, such as creating a renaissance for the ice age ahead. The triad, mind, principle, and spirit, define the superstructure of civilization, the expression of man as the gem of the universe. Below the superstructure lays the foundation that raises the gem far above the mud, where the battles are fought, that are devoid of anything human, with inhuman consequences. Look at life. The foundation structure begins with the profound recognition of the value, beauty, and sublimity of life. Here we find poetry, song, literature, art, theater, music, and so on. On this platform, the shrieking cries for depopulation, genocide, and war find no resonance. Look at truth. The foundation structure also includes the quality of truth, expressed as a distinct color of civilization. The value of truth is not found in the absence of lies, though this by itself would be cause for celebration. Truth, as a recognition, sets apart what is true from the multifaceted circus of the pantheon of speculation, conjectures, opinions, fears, beliefs, uncertainties, and so on. Humanity has the quality to discover the truth, know the truth, understand the truth, and to acknowledge the truth. Look at love. Below life and truth, as if it was the deepest foundation, we find the spiritual gem that is almost indefinable. We cannot weigh love, measure it, bottle it up, but we know that if it was withdrawn from the landscape of civilization, civilization would collapse. We sing songs about it, write poetry and operas to celebrate it, because we all know what it is by its effects. Look at soul. Between the superstructure and the foundation stands the human soul, the heart that colors us divine. The soul of humanity is science. It is the born door to infinity. It is the door to freedom that all the masters of empire in their dark quest have endeavored to shut down with dogmatic impositions and shackle with iron bars of intellectual privatization. And so science lives on. Johannes Kepler looked at the solar system and said to himself, I must discover the principle that is expressed here, because this is life. I must see the truth, because I cannot do anything less, for I am a human being. It may take years, but I must do this, because I am love. I cannot accept anything less for me, because I have an open mind. With this human identity unfolding in the heart, Kepler has discovered the solar system as no one had ever seen it before. Kepler would say to us today, look at what I have done. I started a revolution in thinking that became science. For more than 1,000 years, astronomy had been imprisoned by the doctrine that all movements in the heavens must be on the path of perfect circles, because the heavens are perfect. I have freed humanity from this prison of false doctrine, because the universe did not comply. So why should I? I have presented to humanity the freedom of the truth, the freedom to understand it and to acknowledge what is understood. This revolution changed the face of humanity. It ended the Dark Ages. I made it to happen. I demonstrated that freedom is made, that it doesn't happen on its own. Nothing had happened in the imprisoned astronomy for 1,000 years. My actions changed this history. History is made. I have made history. The laws that I have discovered are now widely applied, including to guide spacecraft to their destination. What I did back in the 1600s is rooted in the principle of the human being, and as a principle, the freedom of the revolution of the truth is still possible today, because principle is universal and therefore timeless. The modern Kepler would say to us in our time, on the critical subject of climate, people, open your eyes as I have done. Look at yourself, look at the evidence, look at what is true. You can do this. What I have demonstrated as a principle in the 1600s can be applied today or any day to break all the prisms of dogma, even that termed climate science, and you will discover what comes out of it is revolutionary. With the truth in your heart, you will invariably step away from the house of the dogmas, where no evidence exists. The dogmas of the small-minded define the very foundation of life on our planet, a dangerous pollutant. which is the carbon in the air that supports life, which is carbon-based life after all. That's pathetic, isn't it? But how can we step away from the doctrinal crap that all evidence tells us is not true? The doctrine tells us that what we live by is a poison. How can we move away from this without having a higher level, truthful platform to step up to? Kepler says, you discover this platform when you open your eyes. But what do we see when we open our eyes? We see that the carbon dioxide density in the atmosphere that all life depends on is presently at the lowest level since life began, and is in fact dangerously low. Yes, the foremost critical nourishment for all the plants and plankton on the planet on which the food chain rests for all higher forms of life has diminished over time to just barely above the biosphere's starvation level. This renders carbon in the air not a villain to be slain, but a friend to be embraced. We need a tenfold increase of the CO2 density in the air in preparation for the next ice age in 30 years. However, in respect to the doctrine of CO2 being a climate change gas that endangers the Earth, Kepler would point out that it is not enough for a scientist to state that according to all evidence, CO2 has no effect on climate whatsoever. The act of trying to prove that something that cannot happen doesn't actually happen twists thinking into knots and dead-end pursuits. It is more efficient to explore what actually causes the climate effects. Kepler would say that science has a greater task to fulfill than to tear down the houses of errors, lies and myths, even those that humanity has become imprisoned in. The task of science is to build a greater house that is free and true. Then society will let go of the old as a response to the true. Kepler would say that it is the task of the scientist to speak the truth, to demonstrate the truth, to build a grander house with the truth than has ever been constructed before. This means speaking the truth about what actually controls the climate on Earth. This truth has the power to liberate society from the carbon climate trap. The truth is solid. It comes with clear evidence attached. With it, society has a reason to rush out of the old trap and occupy the truthful house. Progress is made that way by causing movements with the truth. And for the climate on Earth, the truth, of course, is colored electric. The evidence is everywhere. The truth about the climate on Earth is electric in nature, because our universe is an electric universe. The universe is 99.999% plasma, and plasma carries an electric charge. It would be surprising if the ever-changing electric sun would not be reflected in the ever-changing climate on Earth that the sun creates in the first place with its numerous electric effects. By the process of stepping up to the truth, the scientist embraces the liberating principle of independence from dogmas, to the free world where what is true is knowable and becomes understood and acknowledged, such as the truth that the climate on Earth is electric in nature in every aspect, from the atomic level to the galactic level. The entire climate pyramid rests on the water molecule having an electric dipole quality. Here begins the climate chain. The loose attachment of the hydrogen atoms and the peculiar angle of the attachment enables the water molecule to absorb radiated solar energy on a wide spectrum, which renders water vapor a powerful greenhouse gas that contributes 97% of the greenhouse effect. The boundary between water vapor in the air, cloud condensation, and the liquid state of water, such as rain, is determined by aspects that affect the expression of the electric dipole quality of the water molecules and the ionic attraction between the molecules. With cosmic rays being the most powerful of all the effects that affect cloud nucleation, in the case of electric ionization, our climate is determined by the strength of the sun, exclusively, which determines the rate of cosmic ray flux impacting on our atmosphere, primarily the solar cosmic ray flux that is vastly more numerous. When a weak spot in the corona surrounding the sun can release such a massive solar cosmic ray flux that a large part of a continent is showered with flash floods of cosmic ionization in the middle of a drought, then it becomes fairly obvious where the big climate forcing originates, and for that matter, where all the numerous climate changes originate, which are falsely blamed on CO2 accumulation in the atmosphere, for which the face of mankind becomes slandered as a villain, and has the depopulation news placed around the neck. This means that our climate is determined by the electric plasma density that surrounds our sun, which is determined not by the sun itself, but by electric resonances in interstellar space. Yes, our climate is determined by resonances in interstellar electric plasma streams. The effect of the resonance is so large and so long in cycle time that the effect is determining the conditions that cause the ice ages by causing boundary conditions that affect the sun, and the fragile electrodynamic system breaks down and the sun goes inactive for a season. The sharp electric plasma weakening that the Ulysses spacecraft has measured confirms as evidence that the climate change that gives us the drought is the result of the electric cycles in interstellar space that affect our sun. As scientists, we can know all of this by the evidence that our scientific instrumentation lays bare before us. By acknowledging the evidence and by understanding the dynamics the evidence reflects, we can see the future more accurately than astronomers now see the motions of the stars as reflecting the principles of known dynamics. Just as the motion of the planets is largely affected by the mechanistic interaction of gravity, mass, and kinetic energy, so the electric system that powers our sun from interstellar space is largely electric in nature, is affected by its dynamics and affects our climate as a consequence, including the drought that has now begun. Kepler would say that by us seeing the future unfolding in the scientific sweep of critical observations, we can affect corresponding changes on Earth that accord with the ongoing dynamics of the universe. He might say, we can do this because we are man. We can see electricity in space that no eye has ever seen. We can see the electric effects on our climate because we have an open mind. We know the truth because to a human being the truth is knowable. The human spirit is expressed in the freedom and the independence of moving with the truth, not in denial and subjection. When the human spirit is set free and becomes daringly independent to look at the evidence with open eyes and mind, then the stage is set for the recognition of the universe as being electric in nature, and the sun being an electric star that is electrically powered by the universe that is itself electric in nature, and the earth as having an electrically determined climate that reflects a vast array of ever-changing cosmic factors, such as the electric weakening of the solar system towards the coming next ice age. If the electric truth remains hidden, nothing will break the carbon vilification doctrine of global warming and the vilification of mankind with the seductive lies of the doctrines that are designed to break civilization. Get real, Kepler would say, and celebrate that you are a man. It takes a giant like the human being to recognize and understand the vast dynamic electric factors that no eye can ever see, and acknowledge them with the created technologies and infrastructures that will determine the future accordingly, and this with such power and precision that the needs of the future become addressed with responses in the present for effects that have not yet occurred. Of course, it takes a lot of scientific self-development for society to see itself in this context of unlimited freedom. But what of it? Do the challenges change the principles that afford us those freedoms? We are men, the tallest expression of the universe. Our soul is science, and its name is infinity. We are the gem of the world, with all the power of the universe to let this gem shine in the greatest renaissance ever, because we are life and we are love. We can say to the whore of empire and her seductive doctrines and policies of insanity, begone, begone depopulation, begone genocide, looting, war, annihilation, and so on. Begone, we have no place for small-minded thinking in the world of man. Independence is ours. With it, the dreaming of poverty, blindness, lies, and fascism ends, and humanity's subjection to them ends with them. On this pathway, too, we can leave the old landscape of dogmas behind and develop and build the means that can render the advancing drought in the world of no effect, and come out richer in the process with enriched economies, vitalized culture, and majestically uplifted identity. We must do this and live because we are humanity. We are the greatest of all, with the capability to do what is required. Thus, if the sun can flood the vast landscape with water released from the atmosphere by means of cosmic ionization, as we have seen in Texas, we can do likewise in a controlled, technological fashion, because we are human beings. Since our needs are modest, simple electric ionization of the cloud-making process can give us total control of the result and total independence from the natural climate conditions, including the drought. The Colorado River system can be healed in this manner. If the principle is applied to artificially ionize the atmosphere over the Lake Powell catchment basin, the enhanced vapor nucleation process could theoretically be able to draw the needed few inches of rain out of the atmosphere over the space of a year to refill Lake Powell to its maximum level and the entire Colorado River system with it, including Lake Mead, and to go beyond that. The Hoover Dam has been designed to handle the flow of 11,000 cubic meters of water per second over its spillways, in addition to the water flowing to the turbines for maximum power generation. This full design capacity would make the Colorado River roughly 1.5 times larger in flow volume than the Columbia River is. All this could be achieved with a mere 50 inches of extra rain per year across the Lake Powell catchment basin, where a large portion of the Colorado River presently originates. The high elevation of the Lake Powell catchment basin, with its natural low cloud ceiling, promises to be ideal for applying advanced ionization technology from ground-level stations. The cloud and the conditions to create the rain occur close to the ground. If the cloud ionization technology was applied over the entire, relatively small area of the Lake Powell catchment basin, we would have the means at hand to turn the tap on and off at will to regulate the freshwater inflow of the river for whatever volume we would desire. The same technology, once it becomes established for large-scale application, would give humanity also the power to manage the rate of flow into other major river systems, regardless of the intensity of the ongoing drought, and perhaps so even during ice age conditions. We have the means at hand with this technological principle to turn the dying Colorado River into a water-rich giant, greater than the Columbia River presently is. This is the kind of creative power that we have as human beings, and this would bring us only to another beginning. The same process is fully applicable to also increasing and managing the flow of the Sacramento River system and all the other catchment systems that together make up the California State Water Project and the Central Valley Project, and so on, in spite of the drought. The key to this amazing capability lies not in violating the natural system or abusing the natural system as some people would see the process, but lies in intelligently utilizing the principles by which the natural system operates. It is the natural system that places its thousands of a percent of all the water on Earth into the atmosphere as water vapor by the process of evaporation. We have nothing to do with that. The evaporation process is controlled by the ocean temperature and solar energy. Nor can we alter the principle by which water vapor is turned back into liquid water. But we can apply the principles further to meet our needs. We can learn from the natural system that transports fresh water even to the top of high mountains, and apply what we learn, which is not a violation of the natural system. Right now, we are far from the healing of the Colorado River happening. The principle for healing the river is not even considered. The science that would enable it is denied. The scientific foundation that would make the healing an electrical factor is deemed not to even exist, with the denial going up to the highest level in politics, economics, and in the sciences. The water level at Lake Mead is presently so low and so fast diminishing that it will drop below the minimal level in 2017 that is required for electric power generating. That is, without a healing of the river, with technological means being applied. In order to minimize the impending loss of electricity generating from the dam, 5 turbines will be replaced with wide-head turbines that are designed to work efficiently with less water flow and pressure, which would keep the electricity generating going beyond 2017 until the lake drops below the new and final limit for power production, which is 200 feet lower than the current low limit. After that, the penstocks will run dry, and no more water will run down the river. Then what? What will happen to the 40 million people who depend on the waters of the river flowing? All of the Imperial Valley depends 100% on the water delivered from the Colorado River, both for domestic consumption and for agriculture. The Colorado River is delivered from the river to the Imperial Valley by the new All-American Canal, previously known as the Alamo Canal, that had been routed partly through Mexico. Of course, when the river stops flowing, the Imperial Valley dies. In order to prevent the total dying of the Imperial Valley, plans are considered to drill out the concrete blocks in the diversion tunnel that were used during the construction period of the Hoover Dam, that were designed to channel the river around the construction site. The tunnels were sealed afterwards with concrete blocks when the dam was completed. By drilling the blocks out, the remaining water in Lake Mead could then be drawn down to zero. The Colorado River would then be running free after that, and unregulated, with everybody downstream fighting in the puddles where once a river flowed. But why should any of this happen when the river can be so easily healed with cloud ionization. Without the healing of the river, the entire gigantic construction effort is planned to become wasted, and everything that depends on it is committed to vanish as if it had never existed. The question is, will we as human beings allow this ultimate folly to happen? When the river is healed by means of applied discoveries and technologies, its original design will then continue to be realized to the full, and this with ever greater application of the by then independently created freshwater resources for human living. This is the future that we have at hand to create for ourselves with applied discoveries and technologies. This potentially rich and full future is the future that we will create for ourselves once we begin to discover ourselves as human beings once again and decide to live as human beings. And the step to get there is really just a small step for a man.